Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Friday night. You're excited, right? This is what we do. This is how we party. No? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're going to have some fun tonight. Why morality must be objective. How many of you have heard about this concept of fake news? Is this familiar to you? Unbelievable things that are happening. Well, I found some fake news. I found some unbelievable headlines that I wanted to share with you. And let me make sure that this is on. There we go. Oh, by the way, if you want to keep in touch with me, I am all over the internet. And I'll show this slide again at the end, but basically anything /ComeReason, you can find me. Twitter, Facebook, comereason.org. I'm all over all of those things. So it's easy to get. Okay, actual newspaper headlines. Adam City Star smells title. I don't understand what happens in these newsrooms. Like this one. Miracle cure kills fifth patient. There's something wrong here. There's something that's just not lining up. Or I like this one. Man accused of killing lawyer receives new attorney. That makes sense to me. See, that's logical. I don't know if I'd want to be the attorney, but that's. Or how about this guy? Tight end returns after colon surgery. Gotta love football. Midget sues grocer, cites belittling remark. Okay, I'll just let that one pass. Army vehicle disappears. Oh, next one. Army vehicle disappears, and I love the headline. An Australian army vehicle worth $74,000 has gone missing after being painted with camouflage. Was that not the intent? I don't know. Or this is a breaking story. Manure is not health food, in case you were wondering. Or you have the classifieds. Here's one for sale. Tombstone, standard gray, a goodbye for someone named Grady. This is a little narrow audience that you have to. Okay. And punctuation, kids, when you do English, punctuation matters. Students cook and serve grandparents. These are unbelievable, right? Fake news we hear about all the time. What about fake beliefs or fake morality? Is there such a thing? Most people don't think so. Matter of fact, a lot of folks that you engage think that morality is just as wishy-washy, beliefs are just as wishy-washy as there would be any other kind of personal preference. How many of you have heard one of these things? I have my beliefs and I'm doing just fine. Or, who are you to push your beliefs on me? Or, all beliefs are equally valid. Why should I bend to your morality, right? We hear these things all the time. Well, let me tell you something. There's only one good reason to believe anything. Do you know what that is? There's only one good reason to believe anything. That is if the belief is true. It's the only good reason to believe something. I had a Jehovah's Witness come to my door, and he knocked on the door, and I said, wow, I'm impressed. Most people are going to be watching college football, and you're going door to door. That takes some real dedication. He goes, yeah, well, thank you. And I said, let me ask you something. You must hear a lot of reasons why people give in order to say that they don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness, right? I'm a Christian and I have to be one because my parents raised me that way, or no, this is the Buddhism works best for me, right? Or I'm an American, so therefore I have to be a Baptist or something silly like that, right? And he goes, I've heard all those and more. And I said, can we agree that that's a terrible reason to believe something? That there's only one good reason to believe anything, and that is whether it's true. For even if the belief is nice, you don't necessarily want it to be false, right? So for example, how many of you told your kids about Santa Claus? Everybody loves St. Nick. And there's empirical evidence. Cookies are gone, milk's drunk, presents by the tree. There's some data here that we're working with. But imagine you're on a cross-country flight, and you're going to spend 5 hours sitting next to a 37-year-old man who's going to go visit Santa Claus. Do you want to be in that seat? Why not? What's the problem? The only good reason to believe anything is if it's true. Now, morality, when we talk about moral rules, there's actually true things that we can say about morality. But if there are true things we can say about morality, that means that there are objective moral values that are not just part of our personal preference, and nobody, whether they like them or not, can do anything about it. This is crucial all the way up to the point of arguing for God's existence. Okay? So what I'm going to argue is there are true moral facts that we can all know and that we can discover. That morality isn't relative. It's not based on the eye of the beholder. That there's real moral facts out there, just like there's a real law of gravity, there's a real law of right and wrong. That's what I'm arguing. Now, C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, wrote this. He said, everyone has heard people quarreling. Sometimes it sounds funny, sometimes it sounds merely unpleasant, but however it sounds, I believe we can learn something very important from listening to the kinds of things they say. They say things like, how would you like it if anyone did the same to you? That's my seat. I was there first. This happens a lot in church, right? You can come in and say, he's in our seat. I told you we shouldn't be late. Or, leave him alone. He isn't doing any harm. Why should you shove in? Give me a bit of your orange. I gave you a bit of mine. Come on, you promise. You hear all these things. People say things like this every day, educated people as well as uneducated, children as well as grown-ups. He writes, now what interests me about all these remarks is that the man who makes them is not merely saying the other man's behavior does not happen to please him. He's appealing to some kind of standard of behavior by which he expects the other man to know about. And the other man very seldom replies, forget your standard. Nearly he always tries to make out that what he's been doing is not really going against the standard, or that if it does, there's some special excuse that he can use. He pretends there is some special reason in this particular case why the person who took the seat first should not keep it, or the thing was quite different, or what have you. But Lewis writes, it looks, in fact, very much as if both parties had in mind some kind of law or rule of fair play, or decent behavior, or morality, or whatever you like to call it, about which they readily agreed. And they have. If they had not, they might, of course, fight like animals, but they could not quarrel in the human sense of the word. Quarreling means trying to show that the other man is in the wrong, and there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you had some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong are, just as there would be no sense in saying that a footballer had committed a foul unless there was some agreement about what the rules of football were. Now, Lewis later writes, my argument against God, because he was an atheist, he realized, was very much like this. The universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I got that idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If the whole show was bad and senseless from A to Z, why did I, who was supposed to be part of this show, find myself in violent reaction against it? A man feels wet when he falls into the water because the man is not a water animal. A fish would not feel wet. Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world really was unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. So you see what Lewis is doing here. He's arguing that if he's going to call God unjust, if he's going to call God evil, he's using an objective standard. But where does this objective standard come from? Well, morality has to be rooted in God. And if we say morality isn't rooted in God, then it's not objective. But there's problems with that. And this is where we find ourselves today. Most people today, in order to avoid being culpable to an almighty God, claim that morality is not objective. It is something different. So we have competing ideas of morality. What is morality like? It can be either like ice cream, perhaps, right? How many of you here like ice cream? Oh, get your hands up. How many of you like vanilla ice cream the best? Interesting. How many of you like chocolate ice cream the best? Oh, we have a chocolate crowd here. That's interesting. Now, if I were to say, you vanilla eaters, you're wrong. Chocolate is clearly the better flavor of ice cream. All my chocolate lovers would stand by me in agreement, but the vanilla people would stand up and shout, who are you to say that chocolate is better, right? This is relativism. This is better in terms of personal preferences. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? So, if morality is this way, then you say things like, I shouldn't cheat on this test. It's like saying, I like chocolate ice cream, or you shouldn't like vanilla ice cream. You shouldn't cheat on this test. It's like saying you shouldn't like vanilla ice cream. Well, that's just your opinion. If there is no objective morality, then what do? We can't solve the issue. We just agree to disagree. But I don't think morality is like ice cream. I don't agree with that. I think morality is objective. I think it's more like insulin. Now, if you're diabetic, first of all, you probably shouldn't be eating the ice cream. That's probably not necessarily a good idea. But insulin is necessary for a diabetic to maintain his life, correct? His or her life requires insulin because their body doesn't produce it appropriately. If you don't like shots, does it matter? Absolutely not. If you want to stay alive, you're going to take the insulin. Because whether you like it or not has no bearing on whether it's necessary for you. So objective morality holds that there are certain laws and duties to which all men must adhere that are like insulin. They are objective. Whether you like them or not, it doesn't matter. And this is why we see what we have as a culture clash, because a lot of people believe that morality is like ice cream as opposed to insulin. Now, what do we deal with this? So I think that there are things in the world that are really good, and there are things in the world that are really evil. And we can use those terms. See, I believe objective moral values exist, and I believe that we can know at least some of them. Now, sometimes we get into gray areas and we have to figure this out, but I think we can truly know them. I think objective moral values will hold true at all times for all people in all situations and all cultures. Let me give you one. Let me give you just one. Torturing small children for the fun of it is always wrong. Now that's fairly, I would hope, uncontroversial. If you have a problem with that statement, please see me after, because I want to talk to you. But that's a fairly uncontroversial. It was wrong for the Assyrians when they invaded the northern kingdom of Israel and caught the children on the tips of their spears. It was wrong for the Babylonians when they dashed the Jerusalem children against the rocks, just for the fun of it. It's always wrong. It was wrong for the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, and it's wrong, even if nobody believes it's wrong. It's always wrong. This is what objective morality means. We should obey moral laws. If there are true moral laws, objective moral laws, we need to obey them whether we like them or not. But again, you may get pushback from this, and you have to say, well, how do we know? I mean, we've been reared as a culture to believe this to be so, but it may not actually be so. So what we need to do is we need to compare what morality would look like if it's relative and to see if it makes sense. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend the rest of my time to walk you through moral relativism's 7 signs of suicide. And this is what I mean by this is an idea can only stand if it makes sense internally, right? So everybody knows what a piece of rope looks like. Anybody know what half a piece of rope looks like? It's kind of a nonsense. It's like the sound of one hand clapping. It's a contradiction in and of itself. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking for, is contradictory ideas where moral relativism cuts its feet out from under them. Okay, yeah, you guys understand what self-refuting ideas mean? For example, the statement, there are no absolute truths in the world. And some people make this statement. What's the problem with that statement? It's an absolute statement. Well, if there are no absolute truths, then that's not true. Then there are absolute truths. But if that's, I don't know what to do, you see the problem. It's like saying, I cannot say more than 3 words in English. Oh, I'm in trouble. See, those are called self-refuting statements. And one of the problems is moral relativism suffocates from its own standards. Postmodernism rejects meta-narratives, but in doing so, it's creating its own meta-narrative. So by offering moral relativism to say, there is no such thing as good and evil, well, you may say that that's true from a moral relativism position, but then you can't say you shouldn't make absolute claims. There is no such thing as good and evil, so you shouldn't make absolute claims. Well, see, once you put a should or shouldn't, you're making a statement that people need to behave a certain way. You see how that works? And this is the problem that we see over and over and over again. That moral relativism, once you start boiling it down, it becomes self-refuting. So let me give you other examples. For example, it ignores the threat of evil. Moral relativism ignores the threat of evil. If nothing is good and nothing is bad intrinsically, then there can be no real good or evil. The concept of evil becomes meaningless, right? Because you may say, I don't like it. I don't like vanilla. I like chocolate. I don't like tapioca, fish eggs, and glue. Ooh. Other people may love it, but to say you don't like something is different than calling it evil. How does one judge between a Hitler and a Mother Teresa? Both were driven by their passion to do something. Both saw the world in a certain way. And Hitler believed in his cause, if you've ever read any of Mein Kampf or anything like that, just as fervently as Mother Teresa did, dedicated his whole life to it. Doesn't mean he was right. In fact, if Hitler would have won World War II, if Hitler would have been successful in exterminating the Jews, and 70 years later, we would have all believed that because his propaganda machine would have taken over the entire earth, it doesn't mean that what he did was right on an objective point of view. On a relative point of view, you can't call Hitler evil, though. It was just his preference. And if he makes everybody else believe it, then what he did is good. You see the problem. C.S. Lewis noted that you can't define that crooked line unless you have a definition of what a straight line is. Now think about this for a second. How do you define a straight line? Anybody? The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Mathematically sound, right? Easy. How do you define a crooked line? Anything that's not straight. Could have a single bend, could have a curve and no bend, no angle at all. Could have many angles, be squiggly. A crooked line could be a whole lot of things. We only know it's crooked because it's one thing that it's not, and that's straight. It's not the shortest distance between 2 lines. So if there's nothing that's good and bad intrinsically, then therefore nothing can be called good and bad. We can all just say they're preferences. They're like ice cream. I guess I'm a little behind on my slides. Number 3, it sinks in the quicksand of meaninglessness. What do I mean by this? If a society, now a lot of people will argue, and I talk with atheists a lot, and they will say, well, morality really isn't objective. What we have is we have a culture that has agreed certain things are wrong. Cultural morality is what you call it, okay? And there are truth pieces of our culture that we tend to agree upon. For example, driving on which side of the road. While we would say an individual who comes down the highway and chooses to drive on the right-hand side is endangering lives and is bad. The folks in the UK would say, no, the person who chooses to drive on the left-hand side of the road is doing the correct thing. But those are cultural exchanges. Those are things that different cultures can agree upon. The underlying moral principle isn't which side of the road you drive on, it's how you drive so that you don't endanger other drivers. See, the underlying, the objective part of the morality lies underneath the cultural expression. So if you have a society that is truly setting moral standards, then the majority of the society says what's right. Okay? So we all say driving on the right-hand side of the road is correct. We've agreed upon that. And that's what's correct for us. If morality is the same way, then let's look back to, say, the antebellum South. You had a majority that said slavery was okay. So if the majority says the idea is okay, does that make the idea okay? If infanticide is acceptable, does that mean that and guess what? If infanticide is acceptable, then the people who push for abolishing infanticide are not only bucking the majority, they're bucking morality. They're being immoral. That means that the abolitionists in the slavery movement were the immoral ones in this understanding because they're bucking the majority. If the majority sets the standard, if morality is only, the 51%, you have the problem. Concepts of justice are nullified. The idea of fair laws and unfair laws disappears. It's just simply what the majority chooses. Even concepts of tolerance don't work because you have to get on the bandwagon with everybody else. Otherwise, you'd be considered immoral. You see how morality quickly sinks into nothingness and meaninglessness in this regard. Morality also overdoses on uncertainty. What do I mean by that? I mean that people don't know, especially in gray areas, what's moral and what's not. They don't know where to fall in this scenario. Look, when we read medicine bottles, nobody adopts a relative meaning of the texts to say, well, I know the doctor said twice a month or twice a day, but I really think that only once a day is fine for me. Or I know he prescribed penicillin, but I really, really like the epinephrine better, and I'm going to take that. You don't do that, right? That's silly. I heard a story once about a theologian who said, you know why God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses and not Miriam, don't you? It's because he was afraid that Miriam would come back from Mount Sinai and say, well, I know that's what he said, but I don't think that's what he meant. No, that's not true. I'm kidding. That's what I mean by overdoses on uncertainty. We can't live in a law where everyone can take their own take on morality. Now, again, there's ways of expressing it. For example, there are certain tribes that missionaries had found in Asia, and they were horrified because they were practicing euthanasia on their elderly. And they thought these guys were barbaric, for crying out loud. What are they doing? Turns out what these tribesmen, once they broke the language barrier and such, understood was that they had such respect for their parents and for their grandparents that to see them degenerate into something feeble and old, they felt that gave them a lack of respect. And they said it would be better to kill them than to have them lose their honor. Now that's interesting because that's where we are again today with euthanasia laws. The Christian position is the fact that you are human, the fact that you bear God's image at all proves you have intrinsic worth. Your honor, your value does not come from what you can do or what you aren't able to do. Your value comes from the fact that you are a human being and therefore bear God's image, bear the imago Dei. That's the objective side. But when you take away the objective side, what are you left with? You're left with, well, I don't really want to mess with mom who's in dementia. I don't want to have to take care of her. And I'm sure she wouldn't want to have this either. And then we start down the road of euthanasia. And then you get to places like the Netherlands, where they passed laws to allow euthanasia for people who are depressed. See, not physically incapacitated, but mentally they're kind of depressed. They don't want to, life doesn't feel. Or then you have young teenage girls who want to commit suicide because they were devastated at the fact their boyfriends broke up with them. And this is a real case that happened as well. But this is what I mean by it overdoses on uncertainty. All of a sudden, the lines start to change. It doesn't become really clear what's the right time or the right way to do these things. And then, of course, lastly, moral relativism ricochets back on itself. What do I mean by that? Well, it's very funny that the moral relativists really will come after you if you tell them morals are absolute. They will really say, you shouldn't say that. Who are you to judge me? Why are you trying to shove your beliefs down my throat, right? And you got to say, well, how can you hold to this standard? Where did this standard come from? So let me give you some of these engagements, some of these slogans of relativism, and how we can answer them. And you've probably heard one or more of these in the past, right? And I'll just go through them fairly quickly. Number one, there's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as truth, so how can you say something is true for everybody? Well, this is, again, a problem of it being self-defeating. The statement itself is a universal claim, and therefore it's a truth claim. If there's no such thing as true, then that statement there is not true. Here's another one that you may not have realized. How about, we can only know the truth through science? Anybody heard that one before? So what is your response? Can you tell me what kind of science you did to find that statement out? What did you boil over a Bunsen burner where the smoke came up and said there's no truth other than science? Only science can tell us the truth. What science did you do there? The fact is that statement that they're making is a metaphysical statement. It's a philosophical statement. It's not a scientific statement. So we can reject it because if it didn't come from science, we can't know that it's true, right? So that's the idea. Oh, how about, it's true for you, but not for me. Really? Does truth matter? Should I believe that statement? Should I believe that it's true for you? What if I choose in my truth to not believe that it's true for you and not for me? What? Wait a minute, can I read that again? All of a sudden it becomes, how come that statement is supposed to be true, the one that you just told me? How come the one that you're telling me is supposed to be true for both of us, and then we understand it, but it's not true when I tell you my statement? Seems to me you're playing fast and loose with the rules here. Oh, don't push your beliefs on me. Are you saying that it's wrong? You think that personally held moral views should be applied to another person? Are you saying that's wrong? Yes. But isn't that a view that you personally hold? Yeah. So why are you trying to push it on me? Oh, it's a problem. I mean, if something's wrong, then it's a moral value. So why are you trying to push your morality on me by telling me not to do so? Well, societies create norms, things that work for them. Morality evolved as an evolutionary byproduct. Each culture creates the moral values that are right for them, given specific circumstances, and this is common with all studies of anthropology and sociology. Okay, you hear this kind of thing a lot, and it actually bugs me a little bit. I have to admit, watch the Discovery Channel. My wife hates it when I do. Because usually, if I'm either watching something about the Bible or something about, primitive man or something like that, it will usually end up that I'm arguing with the television. I'm usually, you're wrong, so why didn't you talk about that? And she's just in the kitchen rolling her eyes like, why do you even watch that stuff? You're always shouting at the TV. Let me ask you about this. The Discovery Channel documentaries that send the sociologists to the Amazonian rain jungle or something like that. And they'll tell you things like, these indigenous people leave such a small carbon footprint, And while these people, you see them, a child is born to them and the child is sickly, and the witch doctor will slay a chicken and lay it out for 2 days. And if the chicken doesn't heal the baby, the tribe has to move on in order to forage for food, and sometimes they'll abandon the infant. And although we think this is cruel, this is simply the way that their culture has evolved in order to survive. If they didn't do so, then their children would cause the entire tribe to starve. So it's not really wrong, it's just the way their society deals with these issues. These are the kinds of things that I've heard before. Let me say, I don't believe it for a second. Because you have a sociologist sitting on high in his coat, making judgment on these people, but see, he's above the fray. Now, how do I know this? Because in that exact same scenario, if the sociologist contracts malaria, he's not going to go to the witch doctor and ask him to behead a chicken. What's he going to do? He's going to get himself to the nearest Western hospital and get him the anti-malarial drugs that he can find, right? If his daughter is diagnosed with cancer, he's going to go look for the best medical treatments Western medicine can give him. Why? Because he realizes there is an objective standard. He realizes that it is wrong to just abandon children out to the elements. He knows that there's another choice out there. But just to say, well, these guys, that's good for them, so therefore that's good, that doesn't hold water with me. Just because they don't know of other cures doesn't mean you withhold those cures from them. And it doesn't mean what they're doing is right. It means if we have a better solution, we go in there and we solve it. Ultimately, such a position is an arrogant position, because it places the sociologist as judge and jury over Western civilization as well as it does over the indigenous population. Well, morality is determined by the dictates of society. It's what's necessary in order to survive. This is a type of cultural relativism known as normativism or normative relativism. It means that whatever mores the society holds should be followed. And again, I pointed to slavery, for example, that slavery was once in the majority view in the South. Should it have been left in place? Does that make sense? And as I said, it would make those who push against the moral norms or the popular view immoral. Martin Luther King would be considered an immoral person because he bucked the system. Are you willing to go that far? Is your moral development willing to say Martin Luther King would be wrong? He wouldn't simply be mistaken, he'd be evil because he's bucking the moral norms of the day. Well, the morality stuff, that's just your interpretation. Now, a lot of times this is a dodge. A lot of times this is a way people try to avoid the issue of morality. I was once talking with a lady about religion. She was following a certain school of Hinduism, and she believed that all religions have the same path to God. All religions are good. They have the same path to God. And I said, well, that can't be true because religions hold to contradictory views. She goes, no, they don't. They all teach the same thing. I said, okay, well, how about this? John 3:16 is a popular verse. Everybody knows. It says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Yet in Islam, Surah 25:2 says, quote, he to whom belongeth the dominion of the heavens and the earth, no son has he begotten, nor has he a partner in his dominion. It is he who created all things and ordered them in due proportion. Notice the no son has he begotten versus God gave his only begotten Son. How can both of these beliefs be true at the same time? Well, they can't, which means that her statement that they're, and she said, well, that's just your interpretation. And I said, I have interpreted nothing. I've just quoted them to you. There's no interpretation involved here. You have to reconcile these things back to me. It shows that you have a flaw in your reasoning. And this is the kind of thing that relativism does all the time. The claim seems to assume that there cannot be any factual basis of understanding, either written teachings or belief systems or moral rules, by reasonable people. And that's the problem. Is this is what the text says. We may argue about how it's executed, but this is really what it means. Tell me what other interpretations make sense. Maybe a way that you can answer. That's just your interpretation. Well, give me another one. See if it makes sense in the context of the reading that we're having. Well, you should just be tolerant of other people's beliefs. Okay, well, let me ask you a question. All religions' beliefs are equally valid. Do you believe that? Well, yeah, I believe that. Okay. Christianity teaches pagans worship a false god. If all religions are equally valid and Christianity's belief is pagans worship a false god, can I hold to that? Oh, well, that's a bit of a problem. And that's where we find ourselves. Tolerance is a loaded word. And usually people don't use the word tolerance appropriately. See, tolerance is always meant allowing a viewpoint or an event, a situation that you dislike or disagree with, but you allow it to happen. Okay, if I'm running late to an appointment and I get a pebble in my shoe, wife says, well, do you want to stop? No, we may miss our plane. I can tolerate the pebble in my shoe. Don't like it. I don't say it's good, but I can tolerate it until we get on the plane. Then I'll take it off. That's what tolerance is. Tolerance doesn't mean that all views are equal, but the popular culture has tried to make it mean that. Tolerance means that you can never critique anybody or draw criticisms of any other view. Well, who are you to judge? They say. Well, it's said that the most popularly quoted scriptures these days is not John 3:16, but Matthew 7:1. Judge not, lest ye be judged, right? Now, a lot of people think this is a showstopper. This is something to cut the Christian down in his tracks. Best response I heard to this was given by Dr. Francis Beckwith. He was on a radio talk show with a couple of different clergy and a secular lady, and they were all very, very liberal. And he made a point that some items should be critiques on their moral merit, so he was talking about objective morality. A woman in the audience stood up, and she pointed at him and said, who are you to judge? Dr. Beckwith sat back for a minute, and he thought, and he goes, though the question was not meant to be answered, I think I'll respond anyway. He goes, I certainly do have the right to make moral judgments. I'm a rational human person who's aware of certain fundamental principles of logic and moral reasoning. I think I'm qualified. The response absolutely shocked the lady. You claim that I have no right to make judgments, Dr. Beckwith continues. Your claim is itself a judgment about me. Therefore, you should stop doing that. Your claim is self-refuting. And there you have it. And if we look at Matthew 7 in context, you will see that Jesus, when he says, don't judge lest ye be judged, he's talking about it in a specific context. He says, if there's a speck that does exist, you have to remove the log out of your own eye first, get yourself in order, then you can see clearly to remove the speck in the others. And you can see that there's still an error that needs correcting. He didn't mean don't judge means there's no errors. He just means take care of the bigger issues first. He then goes on in that passage, Matthew 7, to talk about judging the fruits of believers versus unbelievers. So there's clearly judgment that's happening. Okay, one last point, and then I'll close. There was a story of a woman who was traveling on a business flight, and she found herself seated next to some well-dressed businessman in the first-class section of a midweek flight. This is interesting. They engaged in some small talk, and she found him pleasant enough, but as the flight prepared for its final descent and landing, the man finally turned to the woman and made a startling proposition. He said, I find you very attractive, and I would like to sleep with you. Would you consider going to bed with me for only one night if I give you $1 million? No, his name was not Weinstein. But, of course, the woman, this is a fictitious story, just so you know. The woman was initially shocked, as you can imagine. She thought about it, and the money could accomplish quite a lot, paying off her debts, helping her start that business of her own that she dreamt of. So she said tentatively, well, maybe so, yeah. A little later, just as the plane was touching down, the man turned to the woman and said, I'm afraid I overestimated my case. I really don't have $1 million disposable income. Would you sleep with me for $10? Well, the woman was deeply offended, straightened herself up in disgust and said, $10? What do you think I am? The man said, Madame, we've already established what you are. Now we're just negotiating over price. And this is how moral absolutism versus moral relativism works. There is an absolute standard. There is an absolute law. Jesus states that there is one truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You believe in God, believe also in me. We have one purpose. Where I am, you may be also. And that you should be holy even as my Father in heaven is holy. You should be perfect as I am perfect. These are the standards by which we live. These are the moral values to which we seek to attain. And by understanding that morality has to be absolute, it allows us to recognize the Mother Teresas in the world while decrying the Hitlers of the world. To understand there's moral absolutes makes us able to say, we should never kill babies so that we can enjoy pleasure. And by the way, that can include babies in utero. I want to have my pleasure, but I don't want the ramifications, so maybe I'll have an abortion. Oh, all of a sudden killing babies for fun becomes a lot more relevant in the 21st century. This is what moral absolutes versus moral relativism clarifies for us. And when someone comes up to you and tells you that there are no moral absolutes, what they're really doing is they're questioning the existence of God, because it is only God that can ground morality into an objective nature, and we know morality is objective. So I will be here tomorrow for a couple of times. Thank you so much for your time and your attention, and I will turn it back over to Randy's.